Welcome to our 7th lecture of our 2019-2020 Art Studios Visiting Artists Lecture Series, and our closing of the online Spring 2020 lectures. My name is Kaz Azevedo, and I'm a second-year MFA graduate student and a coordinator of the series. We hope you continue to join us next academic year for more exciting artists, so please stay tuned to our UC Davis Art Studio webpage. I would like to thank our department chair, Annabeth Rosen, the series chair, Graham McDougall, and the Manetti Shrem for their support while we continue with our temporary online platform. We also owe a special thanks to the interim dean, Ari Kelman, of the College of Letters and Science for providing the core funding for the series. There will be a Q&A period for this lecture afterwards, which I'll explain the process of submitting questions then. But Mr. Fyfe has agreed to, if you had any questions during his lecture, you're welcome to use the chat room. So I will be leaving the chat room open that you feel the need to ask a question during his lecture. He said that that will be fine. So Joe Fyfe. Joe Fyfe is a visual artist and writer. His work was included in the Times Square show in New York in 1980, organized by Colab. His solo exhibitions include Christian Lethert, Cologne, Acme in Los Angeles, White Columns, Nathalie Karg Gallery, New York, Gallery Ceysson Benetiere, Luxembourg, and Gallery Relaya in Hanoi, Vietnam. And these are just among others. He has received numerous awards as an artist, including an Art Adia, the Guggenheim Fellowship, a Gottlieb, a Polak Krasner, and the American Academy of Arts and Letters Gwendolyn Knight Lawrence Award. He's also received a Senior Research Fulbright Fellowship for 2006 and 2007 for journalism, where he spent 6 months in Vietnam and Cambodia reporting on contemporary art. Fyfe's writings since 2000 have appeared in Hypergenic, Art Forum, Art in America, artnet.com, Gay City News, artcritical.com, Art on Paper, Kilimanjaro, Modern Matter, Buttes, and Bomb, as well as in numerous monograph catalogs. He has curated exhibitions in New York for Zurcher Gallery, Zurcher Studio, Chime and Read, and Apex Art, among other venues. It gives me pleasure to welcome Joe Fyfe. Thank you for being with us.
Hi, thank you. I haven't done one of these by this method before, but I've certainly been to enough meetings. I didn't know I was going to need a lighting designer for this, but I'm in a cabin in Springs, about a mile from the Jackson Pollock place. I guess it's time to really get started on this. I recently was asked to write something for the magazine Transatlantique about Martin Barret, whose retrospective exhibition is opening at the Pompidou in November. And this was an issue that they asked a number of American painters to write about Barret. And the beginning of what I wrote seemed to be suitable for introducing myself and my work. So I just thought I'd begin with that. Abstract painting is no longer some cult practiced among marginal figures, nor does it represent the advanced cultural front it once did. It's part of the general fine arts culture, as are most art forms nowadays, because of education and exposure. Just because the art market is flooded with things called abstract paintings does not mean that criticality has been suspended or there are not issues to discuss. We're in a period of collection and explanation. Personally, I don't think that much more innovation is going to happen. Great abstract painters will always appear, but I don't think we'll have much more vertical development. That's why I love the work of Martin Barret and maybe a dozen others from that approximate generation. Blinky Palermo, Amy Knoebel, Joan Mitchell, Kimber Smith, Peter Joseph, Michel Parmentier, Jean-Francois Maurige, Christian Bonnefoy, Alma Thomas. T.J. Clark writes about Picasso's Three Dancers of 1925, never has a picture's literalness, its mere and proud materiality been staged more eloquently. Mere proud and materiality is really all I care about in painting. It's all that's left for it, and it's plenty. Flannery O'Connor, in a letter, said that the writer's role is not to understand experience, but to understand that he doesn't understand it. Painters are not supposed to understand painting, or maybe not understand anything. One must follow the counsel that Eric Korn attributes to Bram van Velde, who noted that, quote, the most difficult thing in painting is to not want anything, to not try to impose something straight away, but to let oneself go in front of the canvas to surrender. Paradoxically, then the artistic response becomes a kind of renunciation. So I think that's my latest clear statement on what I think about art in my work, etc. So I'm going to put up the share screen thing and show a ridiculous number of images in a short period of time. So I'll just be a second getting that up. Everybody can see? So what I'm beginning with is a couple of installation shots of a show that I had in Ho Chi Minh City in 2004, where I made all the paintings there in about 10 days. I hadn't worked for a few months before then, so there was this kind of build-up. So it was interesting because I just, you know, kind of released this amount of work. Now, the first problem is this thing isn't advancing. Oh, here we go. Okay. The thing that happened with this show that was so interesting is that the way Vietnam is, there's an enormous amount of censorship. So we had to take all of the titles of the paintings after I made them, translate them into Vietnamese and submit them to the Ministry of Culture to be approved. In the meanwhile, this is another piece I did at that time that wasn't in the show. I'm looking for an image in particular. In the meantime, I went from Ho Chi Minh City up to Sapa in the far north of Vietnam. I had been in Vietnam previously, but you know, this was my second trip there. So I came back to see this show that I had done, and I was kind of slightly shocked by it, because I'd realized that I had basically abstracted the kind of general topography of Vietnam into these paintings. That I had been influenced by the place more than I realized. I was almost kind of embarrassed because it was my first show there, and I thought, do these people understand that I've put their country in my paintings, you know? And I really wondered about that at first. I mean, there was a lot of reasons why I was attracted to Vietnam. There's enormous number of reasons. And a lot of them I don't understand. Every time I go over there, I think to myself, boy, now I know why I come here so much. This is like where your work comes from. And then I, you know, go back to my regular life, and I'm not really very conscious of that. But I think it has a lot to do with the kind of general earthiness of the country, the way a lot of Asian countries seem to be kind of improvised and assembled as they go. That particular part of the world is full of all kinds of sense information, more than anybody could possibly want. And the kind of paintings I do now and have been doing since this first group I'm showing you from around 20 years ago is you know, I was a figurative painter, and I painted myself to abstraction through this. I painted myself away from a lot of other ways of making paintings towards this thing that Bram van Velde said, this kind of surrender to like, what is this thing, you know? And around, you know, this is, I don't tend to drop a lot of names other than place names. So a certain amount of this talk will be a lot of place names because they've had an enormous amount of influence on the work. The big change in my life took place in 1988 when I went to see the Blinky Palermo Amy Knobel show at the in New York. It took me, it took a number of years after 1988 before I became an abstract painter, but that is the one point where I saw something in Palermo's abstraction that I never really understood before, and that was a kind of equilibrium between the actual stuff of the way you make a painting and what the artist does and the thing itself. And it changed me in a way that took a long time to happen, but it was a kind of deciding influence. And as years passed, you know, I spent more time in this is just work from the same period, and to 05, 06, around there. But what I began doing is, after 20 years of a kind of 20 years or so as a mature out of art school painter, you know, like after Palermo, it was sort of enough of us of after all this time, a kind of foundational experience that I didn't feel the same need to continue to inform myself by art. I really wanted to be informed by the world and what the world looked like. And so that really, you know, even though I'm particularly involved with French painting and have been because that particular attitude I've strongly identified with, you know, post-war up through the present time, for similar reasons to what I think about Palermo. But the Palermo's kind of told me to look at the world, to go out into the world, and you know, I kind of felt like I knew enough about painting now to like do what I wanted, take it where I wanted. I didn't have to, you know, and to this day, you know, I'm fairly self-sufficient that way. I don't really, you know, I was in a dialogue for a long time with what was going on in Paris, but other than that, you know, and of course, you know, there's a lot of artists and painters I'm friends with, and I admire their work, etc. But, you know, I sort of got on a track with Palermo that just, you know, went where I went with it. So the paintings developed the way paintings develop. But one of the things that came out of my time going to Paris in particular was the way that I think you could just say they ask a lot of fundamental questions of the painting. You know, there's always this problem of what the painting is. How does the painting communicate? And I found these to be really interesting questions. I didn't like the idea of really accepting any of the givens. I thought the givens were there to play with, but not to you know, take some place in particular. You know, so I suppose my subject matter came from going to Vietnam and transforming into the paintings, but then the kind of interrogation of what a painting is became the thing that I do. You know. So this was, back to the travelogue, this was my studio in Hanoi when I came back from my Fulbright, which I could spend just as much time doing my work as talking to other artists and writing about them. I had all the time in the world. It was great. And I had this show, and so where a few years before, I was unconscious of the fact that the landscape, et cetera, of Vietnam was influencing the work. I became very conscious of it, so, and, the idea of what a painting was, to me, I would look at structures like this, and from my point of view, they were abstracted paintings. They were cloth and they had patterns and they had wooden structure and things like that. And, for the next number of years, what I was doing was making abstractions of the actual structure of the painting and, in my work. So I think probably in some of these, with all, this is the Red River in Hanoi. And this was a Religa Gallery where I had my Hanoi show. I had written a review of a performance here a few years earlier. There's a million great things about Vietnam, and one of them is that the spirit of the people is incredible, in spite of the kinds of problems they have from the top down in the government and things like that. And that whole peninsula has been just a very big part of my own life now. So, when I was improvising these kinds of paintings with new materials, there wasn't anything conceptual about them because I had spent so many years doing figurative paintings, working from life, working from photographs and things like that, that I felt like, well, I didn't even feel, I just figured out one day that I've internalized enough composition. So when I think something is clicking, I don't have to worry about it. It just does that. This is a work on paper. This is the National Stadium in Phnom Penh by the Cambodian French architect Molly Van. I'm just bringing this in because I named a sculpture after him down the road a little bit. This is a couple of blocks from where I lived in Phnom Penh, as is this. And then I started, I brought burlap with me, but I started going to the markets and buying fabric in Cambodia. And so there was a kind of transformation to color. And incidentally, the way that these paintings always work is you're not looking at collaged material where one thing is like pasted on top of the other. I have this funny way of working, so everything's always kind of fitted into place. And I never learned how to sew, so I use this archival bookbinding glue. That's great stuff. It's called jade glue. I love it. I first heard about it from Mary Weatherford. So because of this, the paintings go on and off the stretcher a million times. They go back and forth. Half the time I think the thing is finished and I turn it over to stretch it back up again, and the back looks better than the front, and that ends up being the painting. Because there's, put it this way, the thing that I am most averse to is if I look at something I'm doing that, where there's too much artist in it. I'm always trying to sort of keep the artist kind of at bay and sort of foreground what I'm working with. Here's just another addendum on Phnom Penh. This is my Phnom Penh studio. And I was away for a while because first I was in Vietnam and then I was in Switzerland because I was researching this sculptor, Hans Josefsson, who you should look up. He's a great sculptor. So I was given the studio there, and I would there was a museum of his work nearby and a library, and I would work in the studio, and then I'd research this sculptor. So this is actually the closest I ever got to a kind of homage to Blinky Palermo, where I thought I'm going to do a series. Except it was also a kind of homage to Robert Bresson. And there was this monk's cloth I was using along with this muslin. I showed this in New York around 2008, I think. And this is a painting called After Corot. It just seemed like a kind of Corot palette. And I had just gone to see, I had a French painter friend who said, "Do you want to go to the Louvre and look at the Corots?" I said, "That sounds like a great idea." And I went back to Switzerland and I made this painting. I think we're entering a series now of where the work begins to go off the stretcher from time to time, and it does completely for a while. So this is one. This is, actually cloth I bought in the market in Vietnam, Cambodia. They had no idea why I was buying this. It's just like damaged drop cloth. And I thought it was finished, and then this happens sometimes, like a year or so passed, and I went to Bangladesh because I wanted to see the Louis Kahn Parliament, because Louis Kahn is a huge influence on me. And I think that I came back and put these holes in after I went to I forget the actual name of the Parliament building. They had just lifted the military dictatorship and opened it up for democracy again. So I was lucky. I got there just as it reopened. And I was in India before that, and I bought a lot of fabric because I was getting used to buying fabric wherever I went by then. So then these paintings, by then my palette in my studio was like stacks of cloth and stuff I found from the street and wood from here and there and that sort of thing. So it was, and I actually, I gave a lecture at one point, and I put this slide up for different reasons. This is in Sri Lanka. This is one of those trees that was grown from a branch from under where the Buddha attained enlightenment. Anyway, what I said was, this is my ideal painting. This is what I'm basing what my paintings are on. And I hadn't realized it before. And then after that, I did a show called Wood Color Cloth. That's where this work sort of comes from. This is this is around, just to give an idea of size, this is about 70 by 85, I think. It's called a dove. Don't remember the name of this. That's relatively small. That's only about 18 inches high. This is probably the farthest I've been able to extend the idea of surface support, of the support being the burlap and the calf being the structure. I put this in the wood color cloth show along with this painting. So, you know, all of these, I don't want to be critical, but I really feel that I'm painting with cloth, that everything I do is a response to painting. I don't feel that I'm a collagist. I don't feel like I'm a fabric artist. You know, all of the things that I went through for 20 or so years of painting are simply translated in the way that, you know, like this, there'll be a pull of this fabric to bring out a kind of painterly quality. Otherwise, I think, you know, what the fabric does would kind of be dictating the form more than I would desire. This is for Van Molly Van, and you know, this is the physicality of the paintings got to the point where it logically developed towards sculptural type objects, because the way I was viewing the painting was as a sculptural object anyway, you know. And people would always say, well, you know, the way you're going, I'm surprised that you don't come off the stretcher. And my attitude ever since I started doing those burlap paintings was, it had taken me so long to get someplace that I really liked that I wasn't in a hurry to get anywhere. And I just said, well, you know, maybe I'll get there and maybe I won't, you know, because, you know, these burlap paintings, I think that, I think I was like 45 when I arrived at the first paintings I was actually happy with. You know, I had shows earlier, but that was very different. So I wasn't in a hurry to go anywhere, you know, and I'm still not. And I'm not really in a hurry to get anything finished either. And I had, you know, and for a while there, you know, I didn't actually use paint more than a really occasional, you know, washed out line or something for a number of years. And I was off at this residency in Menorca, and all of the materials I sent were lost in, or they were stuck in customs for like the whole time I was there. And Joanne Greenbaum had been there earlier, and she left all her supplies behind. And she said, you know, I just leave my supplies everywhere, so go ahead and use them if you want. So what I did was I went out and I harvested, you know, there was a big election going on. So I harvested election banners and the election posters that were on the phone poles and things like that, and whatever I could find in the garbage, and I started improvising work. And one of the changes that took place in something that occurred to me already was the idea of where perhaps there was something, you know, with this kind of thing where it was raw materials. It seemed to me there was a change that took place where I realized there wasn't anything more raw about printed material than you know, material with some sort of subject matter or lettering on it. There is no such thing as raw material. I mean, even if you, you know, I get a bunch of gravel dumped out here, you know, the gravel has to be sorted. There's somebody that brings in the truck, it's handled. It goes through like 7 or 8 different people. They have lives, you know, people get paid, things go back and forth. So that the idea of abstraction is simply, you know, an attitude. It doesn't have a kind of code, which is why sometimes the later work is referred to as pop, which I don't really understand. I really see everything I do as being very abstract. So these are some of the Menorca things where these pieces of masonite had election posters on them. I'd take them off the telephone poles and take the leaflets off and paint on them. And I hadn't actually stood in front of a flat surface with a brush and made a decision in a long time. Everything I had been doing was kind of against that idea. So I was trying to figure out how to do this. This is one of the few artists who I'm putting in here besides me. This is Pierre Baroglio. These are from Baroglio from 1980. And I'd seen this was a show that happened a few years ago, and it was so close to what I was trying to do, because in Paris they very much are involved with the painting as a form and altering that structure of it. But he seemed so close to my idea of it, which had a lot. The reason that this is another Baroglio. The reason that I found of working with this topography of, well, I wouldn't call it topography of like impoverishment, but this kind of improvised, marginalized culture kind of structure is, I thought it was another legitimate way of reflecting contemporary life, where I didn't think it was important for painting to necessarily reflect the age of the internet, when the same age consisted of so much of the world, living in an improvised hut, selling, bottles of soda by the side of the road. That was just as much contemporary as the internet. And that was sort of underlying a decent amount of how I saw my work at that time. These are some installation images, in some cases, from this isn't exactly in order. So what you're seeing is me selecting various ways of trying to reconfigure the painting as an object. This is my white column show. It wasn't the first time that somebody at the Times didn't understand why I didn't do more, when that was the point. This is a good example of this. Where, it was the idea of, we'll put it this way. There was a point when I was working where I realized that I had much more in common with Carl Andre than I realized, who I still think of now as, because the thing about what Andre was doing, he seemed to be able to level the hierarchy between the people that make the materials, the artist that manipulates the materials, and the viewer that confronts the materials. They seem to be in a kind of tripartite equilibrium, and that's been kind of a watchword with me for a long time. I think it was there before I even became conscious of it, and so that was my attitude about this work, was how do I bring something to it without meeting its object identity, halfway, let's say. And there was things around me I would just take up as a kind of challenge. That there was a window factory around the corner from where my studio was at the time, and they used to bundle up these pieces of wood and leave them out where the cars were going by, and people would take them home for firewood or whatever. And so I would bring them home and leave them around to figure out what to do with them. So the studio it almost became this place where I would kind of sit around and wait for the materials to kind of move closer together. You know, it was, there was, I suppose there was a lot of selection going on, but the event of the thing coming together was really slow. And this went on for quite a while. I'm showing so much work, I can't really stop and talk about them individually because I'm also getting conscious of the time here. You know, like I would source materials in various places. Like there's, if you've ever been to Tokyo, there's this great store called Tokyo Ga. Is that what it's called? No, Tokyo Hands. And it's got everything from a shoe polish department to a hiking department to jewelry making to wood burning to leather working. And I would go in there, a lot of sculptors love the place. And I would buy, I liked these colored balls and I also liked their fake bricks. So, you know, after I had this tray around for a long time, I just dumped a bunch of balls in it one day, and it's another example of a kind of you know, reconfigured painting. It even still had a frame. I have a second version of that too. This I bought off a cigarette salesman in Morocco. The green vest in the middle was actually part of the banner, so I only added the cloth on either side. This is another shot of Cambodia. I probably should have edited this more. My apologies. I'm trying to stay within the time limit here. This is a fairly self-explanatory found and altered object. I see these things as being completely and utterly paintings. You know, they, and also in the Greenbergian sense of being something that is expansive and has a kind of breadth and airiness. On a certain level, you know, what my base is probably in some kind of, you know, Greenberg classicism, I think. This is a painting called Brando. I had this show where I was so in love with the this record that with Sun O and Scott Walker. I was so in love with the Scott Walker and Sun record that I named every painting after a song on it. And this is Hans Josefsson, who I did a long piece on for Art in America in 2009 or something like that, who was almost a Blinky Palermo experience. I saw the work at Peter Bloom and I couldn't even go to Chelsea after that, which is what I was planning on doing. I mean, he just sort of blew everything away. So I got to know him a little bit. I went around Switzerland and saw all of his work everywhere. And this was my homage to Hans Josefsson, where this is another thing that came off the street for a while, and I ended up turning it into something that this actually works. It doesn't, I'm not sure how well it works in the photograph, but the actual sculpture works. If I assemble the cinder blocks, I have to do it. If it's even a little off, it doesn't work. Here's a second version of that, that piece. Vietnam. This is a few images from that exhibition. You know, there's not much to say about this work that I haven't said, except for the fact that it was simply about taking my painting instincts and trying to, you know, improvise, you know, find various things and improvise them into something that relates to a painting. This is another image from Vietnam. You know, one of the reasons I took photographs is I started to think about a kind of slurring between actual objects and things that I make or assembled, and any kind of materiality. It wasn't until I saw the recent Rauschenberg retrospective, he actually said at one point that he's trying to make things that don't look any different from everything that's already out in the world. And it makes sense that he would say that, but that's what I was trying to do also with all of this work, and continue to, you know, this is the first of a number of bathtubs I did. I like the idea of, it's kind of a variation on that piece with the colored balls in it. I like the idea of this thing being a kind of picture, except the edge is the frame and you kind of fill it with stuff. This is Vietnam again. Here's a second bathtub. You know, I would put these in shows with the other work, and it would be a kind of comment on painting as well as it being its own kind of pictorial situation. These were, these banners are all over Japan. You know, they advertise all kinds of things. And when I was there, my partner's from Tokyo, and one of the times we were there, I was trying to steal them, and she wouldn't let me steal them. And I finally found out there's a whole restaurant street where you can buy kind of generic versions of this. So I bought a number of these and played around with them a bit. So I really feel that I have to rush through here a little bit. My apologies. These paintings are made from Korean recycled signage. And I found them in Cambodia, and I thought these would make great paintings. And I guess this is where I started to, in general, I got to the point, and this is my personal Claude Viola, who was a big influence on me for a long time. This is before I knew that he had made any pieces with umbrellas, or didn't remember it. And then I was at a show with him in Brussels, and he said, "Oh, I do umbrellas too." So I think coming up soon is a show I did with him. Anyway, this was my most, this is a painting that got completely off the stretcher and out of a rectangle for me. So that's a Cambodian flag, that's something else, that's a piece of umbrella. And I started moving, this is the point where I started moving back to the rectangle. There's another bathtub. Those are some of those Tokyo Hands fake bricks. This is an improvisation I did with a French Vietnamese artist, Frederic Sanchez. He made paintings that were all based on the kind of awning patterns that are outside stores in Ho Chi Minh City. And they were shipped to me, and I had to figure out what to do with them. So I roughed them up and inset these various, things out of my cloth palette on them, and stretched them very loosely on large stretchers, so they kind of looked like mattresses. So this was in a show in Queens a couple of years ago. I'm supposed to maybe do another collaboration with them in Ho Chi Minh City this winter, if possible. This is a brutalist building in Naples that I wrote about in Hyperallergic. It's just a big influence on me. Its materiality, its whole brutalist ethos of being careful, the combination of materiality and sculpture and architecture, this was from my first show at Nathalie Karg. This is pretty delicate felt, and that's still a set-in piece of a flag that's colored canvas, and you can still see the stretcher bars through it a bit. So these are all paintings from the show I did at Nathalie Karg in 2016, I think. This is a sculpture. This is another bathtub at a show in Munich. This is the Nathalie Karg show. There's that painting in scale. One of the things that interested me ever since I started to make abstract paintings, which at first were pretty conventional paintings where I would just paint on, a stretched surface, was one of what I was doing was I was trying to understand what the painting did. And one of the things, and I was actually, what I was trying to do was I was trying to figure out how the painting communicated, because that seemed to be the problem that painting was stuck with by the latter part of the 90s, when all of this new revolution in digital photography came along. And one of the things I decided was that a painting isn't simply something that it's slow. It's not fast. It's something that a lot of other mediums don't have, is that it reveals itself over time. And the other thing that I thought was very problematic about painting was its relationship to the viewer, as far as it being not exactly confrontational, but frontal. And I always wondered about how does one problematize frontality, probably one of the people that thinks about that the most was Christian Bonfoy, and he actually made paintings out of kind of like this gauze stuff, so you would have to penetrate it. You couldn't just stop at the surface. But I used to figure out a way, well, how do you show the middle of the painting instead of the front, so flipping it a lot had to do, helped with that. So I'm continuing to move. I'm not doing too bad. I got 55 minutes in. There's this bathtub in Munich again. This particular American bunting painting I was making during the elections of 2016. And at one point I looked at it and I thought, well, I know what you're thinking about. And this was a show I did in December 2018 in Saint-Etienne with Claude Viola. And this was a result of him saying to me, "Oh, I make umbrellas too," and we made a trade, and I got that umbrella painting, and he got something of mine, and so what I did was I made this group of work. I didn't know where the show was going to be, and I thought, okay, every piece I'm going to do, I'm going to use a flag and a piece of an umbrella. So you can usually tell which is mine because mine doesn't have any paint on them. So this is back to Nathalie Karg, but here's back. This is the Joe Fyfe show. This S piece is the only one I cheated on where it's actually a piece of banner and not a flag. But that is a piece of umbrella on it. So I'm on the lower left. I'm on the left again. I think that's a Brazil flag or something. You know, for years, whenever I go somewhere, I just sort of see who's selling banners and flags and things like that. I was in Seoul a year ago or so, and they're banner crazy there. There are banners everywhere. So I came back with enough for the rest of my life. So here we are. This Nazi flag was, you know, after the election a year or two, and I found out a place you can get these. They're in Georgia. They'll mail them to you. I thought, well, this would be an interesting problem. I kept it around for a while. And then this one was on a 24-hour long show outside in Paris with about 60 artists. So that's me on the left. And this is getting into very recent work now. This was my last show at Nathalie Karg, where I can move ahead one. This was the first painting. You know, I began to make these very materially oriented paintings again. And there was something about it I just thought was kind of boring. So I thought, you know, why don't I impose that Apollinaire poem on this? And it ended up being a series, and this was my last show. And the way I feel about these paintings is it continues in what I'm trying to do, because first of all, I'm treating the text as material, the same way that you know, if you read certain writers or poets, you know, there's always a consciousness of this ink on the page. Like I always feel that way when I'm reading Beckett, Samuel Beckett, for example. That you know there's a kind of palpable substance to the way that ink is in the page with the way he writes. John Berryman's another one I always think of that way. He always uses those ampersands and things. So in some ways, you know, this of course is a homage to Apollinaire, who I love, and etc. But also it's a kind of it's a different kind of way of problematizing the conventions of a painting, to my mind. Which is all I've been doing for 20 years anyway, is trying to, basically trying to be very unsentimental about what a painting is. You know, I have a lot of trouble with a lot of painting because of a kind of loyalty to conventions or not questioning of conventions. You know, that's my point of view. So we made a little catalog for the show that just give you an idea about where these poems originated. And some of the tall ones are like 9 feet high. They're the first paintings I've done that big in almost 20 years. And then more recent work, around the time that show existed, was up, I came across a copy of Bertolt Brecht's poems in the library one day. I had no idea he wrote poetry, and the stuff is great, even in translation. But just like Apollinaire, the Apollinaire stuff, I felt that I needed to do it in that language. Also because it's more abstract for me, because you know, the paintings are busy talking to me if I know the language. I'm still trying to do one in English. And unlike the Apollinaire poems, I wasn't quite so loyal to the, even though with the Brecht, he doesn't make pictograms the way Apollinaire did. So I had to arrange them sometimes myself. But I would also just, you know, cut them up and just like everything else, these are pasted in. They're not pasted on. They're fit in, so that a lot of the time that might have been the back at one point. This is the one on the announcement. And these are the Brecht paintings that I showed in Cologne in November. I lost the studio I had out in Brooklyn after 33 years, which was probably a good 1,300 feet. And I moved into a 400 square foot studio in the Bronx and made a diptych there. Probably the biggest painting I ever made. So I've tried very hard to put what probably should have been 2.5 hours into an hour. But thank you. This one happens to be a drawing. I'm actually in touch with a Vietnamese poet, and he's letting me use some of his poems. This is just a line out of one of his poems, and I forget what it means. And most of these are Brecht. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. That was awesome. We can open up for questions now. There has been some already submitted to the chat box. Are you able to see that, Mr. Fyfe?
I can see a sea of faces.
Okay. If you are wanting to see what's in the chat box, or I can just start calling them out and then they can start asking. Does that work?
Do it any way you want.
Okay. We can begin at the top. We have our first question from Zena Batalji. Zena, would you like to unmute yourself?
Hi, I had a question about how do you morally feel about using someone else's poverty as inspiration in your work and benefiting off of it through winning Fulbrights or selling your work or it moving forward through the art world? And also, how is this reparative healing for the genocide that the US inflicted on the Vietnamese people, in which people are still suffering in the Vietnam and surrounding countries till this day? And also, I see that you're of the age group in which the Vietnam War was on the television for you as a child. So I wonder, if you could address how this may have psychologically affected the way you view and see aesthetics and objectify aesthetics.
That's a lot of questions.
Absolutely. Sorry about that.
No. Have you ever been there?
Absolutely not. No.
It's an amazing place.
Absolutely is. I have plenty of friends and people that
Yeah.
definitely may have come from there, but no.
Well, as far as the poverty part of it goes, I gave a talk to this group of Vietnamese artists when I was there at one point. And what I did is exactly what I was showing you. I showed them a bunch of my paintings, and I showed them a bunch of pictures I took of Vietnam and how they influenced the work. And I mean, they really like that, and as far as that initial thing when I had the first show there and I looked at the work and I thought, oh my God, I'm being influenced by this stuff. I wonder if they realize that. I mean, my very, very immediate reaction was embarrassment. And then I just decided that I had to accept it. I think it's I suppose what it is kind of like it's sometimes you have to accept the irrational over some kind of moral stance. I mean, would it be immoral? Which would be the ethical thing to do? To not work that way, So I just went ahead and did it, and continued to do it. I could be, it could be considered reportage. I don't know. There's a lot going on now where people aren't supposed to be using other people's material. And I mean, I don't have a general opinion of it. Tell you the truth, I don't even have an opinion on my doing it. That's the honest answer. I don't really have an opinion on it. I don't know what I think about it, but it's what I'm doing. That's the honest answer.
Thank you. Julia Rigby, did you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hi, sorry about that. It's muted. Thank you so much for your lecture. I was wondering, towards the end, you started to talk about some contemporary Vietnamese artists, like the poet you worked with, but throughout the lecture, I was just wondering why we didn't hear more about other contemporary Vietnamese artists you were maybe working alongside or who were influencing your work, even subconsciously. And then the second part of that, you talked about towns in Vietnam being improvised and assembled as they go. I'm wondering what you mean by this. Is that in context to the genocide of the war? And then when you mentioned gathering your inspirations from the country, how do you feel like you were able to give back? Thank you so much.
How I was able to give back.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose how I gave back was simply that I was a writer and I was reporting on what was going on among Vietnamese artists, Beyond that, I felt like there was a kind of dialogue. The reason I got the first show was I had gone over there and I'd met all these Vietnamese artists, and I wrote this thing for Art in America called Report from Hanoi. And then I was like who Vietnamese artists would visit when they came to New York. And then they brought a gallerist with them one time, and then she offered me this show. I got to know a lot of artists there. So I don't know what exactly I gave back. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I certainly didn't, you know, I sort of followed my nose. One of the things that I didn't bring up was the fact that um, maybe in the early 90s, I had this job where I was down teaching at UT Knoxville, and I was teaching. They could teach a seminar, whatever you wanted, and so I decided, you know, I always wanted to investigate Baudelaire, so I'm going to do that for the seminar. So we read Baudelaire's art criticism, etc., for the whole semester, and the basic idea I got from him is that basically what an artist is supposed to do is to follow his curiosity where it takes him. That's his first loyalty. And that's what I did. I think also in some ways it's probably an artist's job to be non-judgmental about that. And I think that's what I tried to do. That's why I do what I do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Gretchen Lamasri, sorry, I can never see your last name. Would you like to ask your question?
Sure. This may relate to some of the other questions that have come up, but I was interested, and your work kind of illustrates this in a way, but I was interested to hear more about your statement that you see abstraction as an attitude and how that informs how you make your work and go about your life.
I didn't say anything about my life.
Okay. Work. I meant your perception, I guess. That's why I put life into it.
Well, I think it's very strange because you know, Palermo is somebody that sent me out into the world in a way, but at the same time, the other thing I got from him, Gerhard Richter said this about him. He said the thing that was so amazing about Blinky Palermo is that he saw painting or art as like a whole other world, you know, and I sort of understand it that way too. The thing that's so interesting about art and painting for me is that even though what I'm demonstrating here is that I'm sort of filtering a kind of experience through it, it also has really nothing to do with me. The thing that I think is so interesting about painting and about art is that it doesn't have to do anything with you at all. It has its own kind of life and its own kind of you know, conversation that can just go on and you can participate in on some level that you want. But it's an interesting thing outside of anything that has to do with me or my life at all. That's what I like about it. You know, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Thank you.
Wrong, I'm sorry, I think I skipped over you. I didn't mean to. If you want to unmute and ask your question, you may.
Hi, you showed images of your studio and surrounding area in Vietnam of the galleries. You talked about seeing abstraction in the surrounding built environment. Presumably these are inhabited spaces. So my question is, how do you interact with the spaces, or how did you interact with the spaces that you choose to abstract with the people within them? Are the people affected by the abstraction of their real spaces? Are they changed? Does it matter?
Well, you know, I mean, I feel like I keep answering the same question in a way, and I don't know exactly how to give you an answer. I mean, you know, there's things I took photographs of that I think inform the work on some level. you know. But in general, you know, the thing about that place is that it's such a big experience for me, and it's such a complex place that I don't really know in the end what it's doing. I'm guessing. I just know that it's a big experience in my life, and it's important to me in relation to my work, you know. And it's funny the way things like that will happen. You know, I don't think that artists have a lot of control over what influences them. You know.
I certainly can relate to that.
Yes, that is a very good point. Ilse Blas, would you like to ask your question? You may unmute.
Hi. Hi, Joe. It's Lisa. So my question has to do with, because I've seen your shows in the flesh here in New York, and looking at some of the installation shots from some of your previous exhibitions, I noticed how much of there's this real kind of magnetism between the sculpture and the paintings. And because you had talked about almost trying to subvert the frontality of painting in your own work and trying to find that center of gravity, which I think is where the viewer really engages and time slows down in that process of engagement with a work of art. I'm just wondering if you've ever thought about the works when they're taken off the stretcher bars in those instances in which you have had them off, if they have ever been exhibited or shown within a space where they're sort of slicing through the actual physical space of the gallery, so that viewers would have almost this front back three-dimensional contact with those paintings in relationship to the sculptures. I know that's a kind of proposition in a way, or something that maybe hasn't been done yet, but it just made me think a lot about some of our previous conversations, and even being in your studio and you talking about this, taking the stretchers or taking the work off the stretchers, putting it back on. And it's sort of this thing that goes back and forth like a dance. It's in many ways like chance, almost a Cagean kind of chance there somewhere within that act of painting. And so I just thought about whether or not people are probably always suggesting things to you, but if you sort of see these paintings as possibly completely acting within a gallery space three-dimensionally at some point within an installation.
I don't know. I mean, I kind of got lost in the middle of your question, Lisa, to tell you the truth. I mean,
okay, sorry, it was a bit of a long-winded question, but just, for example, just if the paintings were taken off the stretcher bars completely and installed in a way where a viewer almost had that sort of experience of the work as a painting, but also in the round, for example, as in communication or in dialogue with the sculptures. Just because there's kind of a powerful magnetism, I think, between your sculpture and the painting.
Well, I mean, the paintings have been shown with sculptures plenty of times, you know, not in the last show because it was just a painting show, but I think the thing that's been happening now is that all these different ways that I took the painting apart, I sort of decided to try and put them all back together in the same painting or something, you know.
Right.
You know, I sort of like found out through being absent from it that you know, working within the rectangle to make decisions within the rectangle is actually kind of interesting after spending 20 years trying to do everything but.
that answers my question. Is yeah,
Okay.
that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's where I am at the moment.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you for that. Jason, I'm sorry, I believe I skipped over you. Jason, is it Stopas?
Hi, Joe.
Hi.
Good question. You got to get lost for a minute. A couple of things that I thought about. One was that with respect to the kind of moral or ethical question that keeps popping up is, you know, are paintings or sculptures moral objects or ethical objects because they espouse a virtuous message? And for me, it's not that simple. Like, that's not an obvious answer. And I think what happens when you're creating these kind of cross-cultural dialogues between material is that you, by addressing the materiality of the thing, you complicate the social and economic and political reality that that material belongs to. And I think a lot of artists over time have thought about this. Like the great political artists that I think about, or who are interested in politics, get at that. David Hammond's being an obvious one, where he's like complicating some material, and that's how you get at the political, not by saying like, I'm about this political situation and that being a signpost or simply just an illustration of the idea. But I thought about that as an aside to my actual question, which is, you talk about wanting to limit the amount of artistry or aestheticizing that you do, and that you want to surrender to materials. And I thought about this as a contrast to the way that Americans think, where there's a lot of aestheticizing of a hand, trying to perfect the way that you make a mark. And could you talk about that? Could you talk about if that's a relationship between humility as opposed to being a virtuoso?
Well, there's two things. Don't let me forget about the second part. But the first part is, I actually did say something in relation to this kind of, which I don't really do too much anymore, but the earlier work that kind of looked a little bit like impoverishment. And people used to occasionally say to me when they got the work, you know, that, you know, you're trying to abstract something like in these refugee camps and stuff. And I said, yeah, that's right. There's a message in there. You know, there was power. I mean, I think that there is a political message in some of that work. The same way I was saying during the lecture that, you know, somebody by the side of the road and, you know, selling soda, you know, in a shack is just as much the age of the internet as paintings about the age of the internet. I did say that during the lecture.
Yeah. Well, and that has
and then but the second part about, I said too much artist, which I didn't. I meant it in a kind of general way, you know. But it's a very visceral response. It's just that I look at the work and there's too much of me in it. I don't like it. Generally, it has to do with a lot of painting. There's an endless amount of self-reference and flourishes and stuff, and you know, and I don't like feeling like I'm being sold a work of art any more than anything else, because we're in this world where we're constantly being manipulated and we're being sold something and we're being pushed. So I don't want to make a work of art where there's anything like that going on at all. So that's what I mean by too much artist, is that the last thing I want to do is like force a work of art on anybody.
Yeah, that makes sense. That answers that question. Yeah.
But it's a very visceral response. I used to say, nobody's going to buy my work for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, well, by taking yourself out of the picture, it's a self-effacing gesture to some extent, and that you're not peddling oneself, branding oneself in some way that's very popular.
Well, you know, I don't know. I'm stuck with me and my own visceral responses to things, you know.
Sure.
whatever that may be, you know.
Well, we thank you very much. Thank you, Joe, for answering these questions. We are near the end. We have one short question. It sounds like Nadia Richardson. We can end with her question.
Yes, hi, thank you. So I'm more curious about the flags, and I'll tell you why. So I'm a multicultural mix, but my dad's an American, and my family's been military back to the Civil War. So I was raised really strict on what the flag and folding it, half mast, full mast, saluting, you know, military bases. And I know, like I was raised that if it's ever torn or tattered, to burn it ceremonially. I think my stepmother cried in the Girl Scouts meeting, burning the flag. And I know John Trudell, you know, he burnt the flag upside down. At 12 hours later, his family was killed and burned to death. And so I know even when I was working on a project this quarter for class, I was abstracting the flag because I was representing this, but accidentally it looked like it was upside down. And because I felt, you know, because of how I was raised, I felt like I had to correct it, but I didn't like it. I felt like with times today it should be. So I'm wondering, did you catch any heat? Because it seems to me you've done all these different flags, and you know, some people hold a lot of, you know, weight to that. So have you caught any heat around any of the desecrations of the flags that you used for your art? Did you use the American flag? I saw the rebel flag in there. It looked like you used pieces of American. I was wondering because I didn't see that at first. And then I saw abstractions, but it looked too small to be the American flag. But then there were other country flags that were used. So that's more what I was like really curious about.
Well, there was that one American flag in particular that just had some pieces of fabric on it. And the thing that I was so happy with that is that I mean, it's really a loaded thing to work with when you're an American, but the thing I enjoyed about that so much is I felt like I was working with something, I was working with an abstraction at that time. It felt good to treat it abstractly.
So nobody's given you any heat about any of the flags being cut up and used in art?
I actually had a tricolor that I did a couple of things to in my studio, and as soon as I put it up on the wall, the two French visitors I had stood up out of their chairs, which I thought was kind of interesting. That's the only incident of any kind I remember.
But you didn't actually use an American flag then, you just used abstractions of it. If you had used an American flag,
no, that was an American.
That was an actual real American flag.
Oh yeah.
Okay, and they didn't.
It was actually that wasn't cut up. I just put things on top of it.
Got it.
The rebel flag I put in a painting because I just didn't. I thought I'm not going to not use this thing because I want this painting to signify that I'm aware of what's going on outside of maybe this gallery or something, you know. I mean, you know, there's a lot of things I try and use that I don't know if I'll be able to use or not. It's kind of fun to try and figure out if you can make art out of weird charged stuff.
Did you do the flags more recently? This obviously wasn't back in the days, right?
The Trump flag?
No, just most of your flag work that you presented tonight. Is this a newer exhibit, or is this? When did you have these?
You mean the show with Fiala, the two-person show? That one?
I'm not positive. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I've been using them for a while. Wherever I go, I try and source material I might be using. You know, banners or posters or, you know, kites. You know, I'm drawn to things that are kind of like paintings that aren't like paintings, which is, I just love kites for that reason, because they're kind of like a painting, and the way flags are kind of like paintings, you know. I like the sort of distant relatives of paintings more than the actual thing. I guess you could say.
Okay, thank you.
Mm.
Yes, thank you very much. And folks, will end our lecture for the evening.
Well, and thanks for having me, and thanks to my friends for visiting.
Yes, thank you very much for all your generous time. And UC Davis faculty and lecturers, please hang out for a second, and we'll meet afterwards. I will end the recording now.